This is Yair, Davidiy speaking to you on behalf of Brit-Am, Hebrew awareness. We researched the whereabouts of the lost 10 tribes. We have found them amongst Western nations, including the islands of Britain. And within Britain, there is the province of Wales. There's a country known as Wales, which is a small country, but historically was quite important. And it is of great interest. And we identified the inhabitants of Wales with, at least in part, a good degree of Israelite descent. And within the constituent tribes that made up the population of Wales, we find a good proportion from the tribes of Joseph, that is from Manasseh, from the tribe of Dan, from Judah, from Levi, through the descendants of Moses, and also, and especially, from the tribe of Asher. The tribe of Asher was one of the Israelite tribes. It was an important tribe, an interesting tribe, and we also find people from Asher amongst the Scandinavians, amongst the Scottish, amongst the Irish, and elsewhere. It was also prominent in Ireland. It was also prominent in Wales, and that is what we will concentrate upon now, for the present. Now, Wales is part of the United Kingdom. Together with England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, Wales is within the British Isles and is part of the United Kingdom. The population of Wales is about 3 million. 3 million people compared to England with 66 million. And the United Kingdom altogether, that is including Scotland and Northern Ireland and England and Wales, you have about 67 million. And most people in Wales, most of the Welsh have some English ancestry, and a good proportion of the English also have family relationships to the Welsh. In Wales, out of 3 million people in Wales, 1.8 million, that is almost 2 million people, identify as Welsh only. That is about 58% of the population. Another 7% identify as both Welsh and British. The Welsh prefer to find their place within the British Isles as part of Britain rather than to be independent. They have a feeling that through being part of Britain they're best able to express their tribal and their national destiny. In 1979 there was a referendum to ask the Welsh people if they wanted more autonomy, if they wanted a constituent assembly of their own, and 80% of them, or more than 80% of the Welsh, voted against it. So that is interesting. Ethnic studies usually distinguish between the Welsh in the northern Wales and those in the south. But the Welsh characteristics, what are considered to be Welsh characteristics, on the whole seem to be prevalent in both areas. The tribe of Asher was part of the tribes of Israel. When the Israelites were encamped around the tabernacle, Asher was in the north together with Dan and Naphtali. They were the northern tribes. And this location, this placement, was reflected in later times. Asher was also to be found among the Scandinavians. The Vikings may have also constituted part of the tribe of Asher. It says in the Bible in Genesis 46:17, and the sons of Asher were Yimna and Yeshua, and Isui and Beriah and Sarah their sister, and the sons of Beriah, Heber and Malkiel. Now, for our study, Heber seems to have been especially prominent. Heber was head of a group amongst the tribe of Asher, and he himself was a grandson of Asher. The name Heber, or written as Heber, pronounced in Hebrew more as Heber. This also could become Heber or Kabir. And we find this name Kabir in an old British account, Petit, In 1601, he says that Britain was first populated by the sons of Brutus, who came from Troy in Anatolia, present-day Turkey. They reached Britain via Italy, and Brutus had 3 sons. One was Albion, who received Scotland, Locris, who received what later became known as England, and Cabba. Cabba was given Wales, and Cabba is another way of pronouncing the name Heber. Heber, the grandson of Asher, who, as we said, was to become an important entity in its own right. A researcher in Britain, Stephen Phillips, he wrote to us that the name Cabba, that is the son of Brutus, who received the portion known as Wales, Cabba, he says the name Cabba may etymologically be related to Cymru, which is what the Welsh call themselves. And this name Cymru connotes fellow countryman. In other words, a friend. The word Heber, as well as meaning union, can also connote friend, companion. And so fellow countryman means the same. So that the Cymru and Cabba may have the same origin in the Hebrew language, and they may be dialectical expressions of the same cognomen. He also notes that the use of the word Cymru as a self-designation derives from the post-Roman era, the relationship of the Welsh with Brythonic-speaking peoples of northern England and southern Scotland. It emphasised the perception that the Welsh and the men of the north were one people exclusive of other people. So you're saying that the Welsh saw themselves, or at least a portion of them saw themselves as being of the same stock, the same root, one may say, as the lowland Scottish people and others in that area. We also noted that historically the Veneti and the Picts of Scotland, or Picts, were known as a powerful people in Scotland at one stage. And they are related, or Edward Dawson believed that they were related to the Veneti, people in western France who were famous, important seafarers. Julius Caesar spoke of them. They were very powerful. They also had Phoenician aspects, attributes in the cultural sense. And they moved to Britain. At first they were located in Scotland, north of the Hadrian Wall, where they became known as the Venicons, and then there they were associated with the Picts. They were adjoined the Picts, were associated with them. The Picts were a powerful naval people, a powerful maritime force in the region, and it is suggested that maybe their association with the Veneti added to this, or enabled them to amplify the seagoing enterprises that they had already started out upon. Eventually the Romans defeated the Venicons. At that time we were in lowland Scotland, in that area. They resettled some of them in northwest Wales, which was then known as Gwynedd. Eventually they came to give their name and their characteristics to all of North Wales, which was known as Venedotia. Venedotia was also a name given to all of Wales at one stage. And this name Venedotia is believed to be cognate, to be of the same family as the Irish Feni. Feni were a group of peoples in Ireland in Roman times, and the word Feni means band or union. And the Feni were believed to be related to the Venedosians, who were important in northern Wales. And then, the two names are of the same origin, and the two names are believed to be band or union. And so his name is Heber, the grandson of Asher. These are not the only things we are basing ourselves upon. This is just an introduction to show you more that the Welsh do have attributes that do correspond with them belonging to the tribe of Asher, or at least in part. We've also shown elsewhere in the prophecy of Amos 4, as we've explained in another talk, Amos 4 describes the Israelites being taken into exile by Phoenician, that is people, sailors from Tyre, and Philistine sailors from the south, but connected to the connected to the Minoans of Crete and Cyprus, and they under Assyrian direction, together with the Edomites, they took Israelite captives when they destroyed the state of northern Israel, northern state of Israel of the 10 tribes, and they took them to other portions of the Assyrian Empire, and part of them they took overseas, as Amos himself mentions it in chapter 1, and also in the Hebrew version, according to Aramaic transcription, he also especially mentions them being taken by ship, and he speaks of the working of children, and that this probably took place with the Great Orme mine in northern Wales, that in ancient times supplied a good portion of the copper that was needed in the making of bronze. It was probably the biggest source of copper for its age, and archaeological excavations of the area showed that they had very small tunnels that for the workers to quarry in and to dig out the copper, and that these tunnels must have been either very small children or a type of pygmy race to explain the small size of the tunnels involved. And this corresponds with the Israelites having been taken by these people, as we show from other sources, to the west, to the British Isles, and made to work on behalf of the Syrians in agricultural and mineral projects. What we find from biblical sources and also from archaeological evidence is that the Assyrians conquered the northern Israelites. Remember, there were 12 tribes of Israel. They had been together in one nation, one country. They divided into 2 different sections. The northern section, comprising of 10 tribes, set up its own kingdom, was conquered by the Assyrians, and it was taken away into exile. It was taken away in stages. And the prophets of the Bible speak of this. And also archaeological evidence confirms that all of the northern tribes were taken away. The whole of the northern kingdom was destroyed, and the Assyrian inscriptions themselves confirm this. And we find indications from archaeology and the Bible and elsewhere that the Assyrians, and the archaeologists are coming around to this view, or at least a portion of it, the Assyrians combined forces or used Phoenicians as proxies in their overseas enterprises. The Assyrians had a navy which was manned by Phoenicians, so-called Phoenicians, from the cities, mainly from the cities of Tyre and Sidon, on the coast of Lebanon, and the Assyrians used these people in their overseas projects, and they also used Minoans, who are actually Philistines, and Amos speaks of the Philistines. Also, in the same way, the Minoans were also great seafarers, and they used them in the same way, and the people of Edom were involved in this whole enterprise as go-betweens to some degree between Assyria and these peoples. The Edomites were not only in the southeast of Judah, in a kingdom of their own in the southeast of Judah, but they're also scattered throughout the Middle East, including in Babylon, including in Assyria, including in what is now known as Turkey. They had enclaves throughout the Middle East, and they were a powerful people, and they served other nations. And they also participated in the exile and the subjugation of Israelites after the conquest of the northern kingdom. And one of the places they were taken to is to Wales, where archaeologists have found this great Orme mine, and the vast quantity of copper that was extracted from it had to go somewhere, had to be used by someone, and this corresponds with the Assyrians doing that, as they also did in southwest Spain and elsewhere. And Amos had referred to this, had referred to children being taken away and made to work by the Assyrians, being exiled. And we find in this great Orme mine in the northern Wales, which was in production, it was in full-scale production at that time. We also find the remains of a settlement which, according to local tradition, was that of Jews, meaning Hebrews in any other language. And we have more evidence, and it all fits together to create this overall picture. Prior, the inhabitants of Britain, the people of Wales, related to the earlier inhabitants of Britain, before the Anglo-Saxons came, the inhabitants of Britain at that time had a Celtic-type culture. They worshipped Baal, which is another name for Baal, the Canaanite god, and they worshipped him, and they also, according to the Canaanite customs, and also had Israelite customs, a mixture. 10 tribes before they were exiled are described in 2 Kings 17 as having copied the ways of the nations around them, and worshipped Baal and Asherah, and gone in the ways of the other peoples, and also mixing in their own beliefs, own Hebrew beliefs, together with pagan ones. That was the reason they were exiled. And when they were exiled, they had priestly castes that had already existed amongst them previous to their exile. And this priestly caste continued their religion in their places of exile. This gave rise to Druidism. Druidism was in many of the Celtic areas. Britain, the Isle of Britain, was considered the centre of Druidism. When the Romans invaded and conquered England, they persecuted the Druids, so many of the Druids moved to the north. Some they had sent in the Isle of Mona off the coast of Wales, and also in Wales in general. So this too, in its own way, is indirectly a proof or an indication of Israelite origin. We also have the Welsh language. The Welsh language is partly Hebrew. The language of Wales, Welsh, is partly of Hebrew. Whole sentences or parts of sentences of the Welsh translation of the Bible, when compared to the Hebrew origin, are almost the same or very similar. And we were shown examples of this to people from Wales who came to Israel, and we showed examples of this to them, and they agreed that there is a strong correspondence, and also others have written to us saying the same. We have several testimonies to this effect. We have a book, Carl Jongeling, comparing Welsh and Hebrew. And this book is written by someone in Holland. He discusses this. He discusses the similarities, or the alleged similarities, between Hebrew and English in great detail, especially from a technical point of view. At the very end, he seems to say as if he doesn't agree that there is a relationship, whereas much of what he'd written previously seemed to indicate the exact opposite. Not only that, he has a bibliography at the back of his work, where there must have been a large bibliography where, going back to the 1500s or earlier, the books were written on this, comparing Welsh to Hebrew, right from the very more than 500 years ago. People have been writing about this and with examples and discussing it. And not everyone who wrote about it said it proves that the Welsh descend from Hebrews, but they didn't say such things as if it does show that the Welsh and the Hebrews must have an ancient common source, that possibly there was a substratum amongst the population of Semitic origin, similar to the Hebrews that the Welsh who came afterwards copied or adapted their own language to, and all kinds of suggestions like that. But the bottom line is that there are similarities between Welsh and Hebrew, and in some cases the similarities are very strong. And this is evidence. That is not conclusive proof, but it is evidence strengthening the claim or the belief that the Welsh, to a good degree, are descended from the Hebrew peoples. As we said, we identify the Welsh with several Israelite tribes. One of them, possibly the dominant tribe amongst them, is the tribe of Asher. We have biblical descriptions of Asher. We read out a few of them and discuss them. We have Genesis 30, verse 13. Then Leah, the mother, Leah said, when she gave birth to Asher, I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed. I am happy. Ashri, it contains the the root Asher. The daughters will call me blessed, Ashruni. So she called his name Asher. Asher in Hebrew means, correctly, means happy. It's commonly translated as meaning happy, and that is correct. It also has another meaning. Asher in Hebrew also connotes assure, reassure, strengthen. And the English word assure, to assure someone, to reassure someone, that comes from French or from Latin, ultimately also comes from Hebrew. From the Hebrew word assure. The Hebrew word assure, the asher, in Hebrew means to assure someone, to reassure them, to strengthen them. In Genesis 49:20 it says, bread from Asher shall be rich, and it shall yield royal dainties. Deuteronomy 33 says, beginning from verse 24, and of Asher you said, Asher is the most blessed of sons. Let him be favored by his brothers, and let him dip his foot in oil. Your sandals shall be iron and bronze, as your days, so shall your strength be. So this second verse, verse 25, Deuteronomy 33, verse 25, it says, your sandals shall be iron and bronze. It says, your sandals shall be iron and bronze. In Hebrew, the word translated as sandals is na'alecha. It also can be rendered or translated as meaning your locks or your bolts, and some translations do give it that way. The word comes from the root now, which means to close up. When you close a door, when you lock a door, you close it. When you put on a shoe, you put on your shoe, you close off your feet. So that is the connection between the root, a root meaning close up, lock up, and the words meaning sandals, or meaning locks, the meaning of now, as we find in as we find in Hebrew of the Talmud used in the Second Temple times, now can also connote have the last word, be the decision maker, and this could be its meaning here. Asher through iron and bronze will have a decision-making capacity. Your na'aleka, your ability to close things up, shall be through iron and bronze. Iron and bronze, the word translated as bronze in Hebrew is nahoshet, actually literally meaning copper. Copper was very important in the production of bronze. Bronze usually has 90% copper and 10% tin. The copper was produced in Wales, and the tin was produced in Cornwall, and they're quite close to each other. Ibn Ezra, 1089 to 1164, the commentator, Ibn Ezra, who incidentally travelled all over the world, he spent his last days in England, and he translates this, or he explains this blessing to Asher, of Asher being the most blessed of sons, and then be favoured by his brothers. Your na'alecha, your locks, or your closing force shall be iron and bronze, he shall say, for in his domain, Ibn Ezra said that means that in his domain, in his area, will be mountains of iron and copper. And these blessings were given for the end times. They had pertinence to the tribes when they came into the land of Israel. The blessings given to them by Jacob and afterwards by Moses, which complement each other, they did come into expression after the Israelites had conquered the land of Israel, or the land of Canaan as it was, and divided it amongst them. They did in some ways come into expression there, but the ultimate expression will be in the end times, in our times, or in recent times throughout history. It says Jacob, when he gave the blessings, he said, gather around me and I'll tell you what will happen to you in the end of times. It doesn't say when you come to the land of Canaan. What happened to them after they came to the land of Canaan was only a paradigm of what would happen later, a prototype, as if to say, a preparation